Today we'll be talking about disaggregated infrastructure, and our agenda will kind of follow three broad categories, where first we'll discuss workload trends and changing dynamics in the hyperconverged infrastructure space, before moving on to portfolio evolutions and how alliances are shaping the disaggregated infrastructure trend. And lastly, we'll go over TBR's forward-looking expectations. As Haley said, my name is Ben Carbonneau, and I'm a senior analyst at TBR. My focus is IT infrastructure, but more broadly, also looking at just OEMs, hardware OEMs in general. So looking at PCs as well as the semiconductor market.
And I'm Angela Lambert. I'm a principal analyst here at TBR, also focused on covering the OEMs. So let's jump into our discussion today, setting some context of some of the broader market trends that we see influencing the disaggregated infrastructure trend. I'll hit on the first of those two trends right now, which is really broadly shaped by hyperconverged infrastructure customers rethinking their strategies and reevaluating HCI as their default tech stack. We've seen the hyperconverged infrastructure has had many benefits for customers over the last decade or so in terms of simplification. There's obviously, on the other hand, been some limitations around the infrastructure in terms of scaling of compute and storage, choosing specific HCI stacks that align with the compute and storage needs of specific workloads. But really what we see here in terms of the broader impetus of the shift of attention towards disaggregated infrastructure, it's been much more acutely driven by VMware's changes to its virtualization software licensing and pricing practices. And we do see proof in the market today that this is not just kind of a trend or marketing piece that's being discussed by companies, but there's really been some concrete action taken here. From TBR's own survey data of IT infrastructure buyers, of our survey data group that we look at every year, almost the entire group is a VMware customer to some extent. 96% of our respondents today use some VMware products as part of their IT infrastructure. That is expected to change drastically over the next few years. So of our respondents, about 42% of them plan to continue using VMware in the long term, but there's an enormous group of IT buyers out there who are evaluating other options. And even within that 42% who can plan to continue using VMware in the long term, they're not necessarily going to be using VMware to the same extent that they are now, or it may be for certain workloads and not others. So that's really influencing how customers are thinking about making their next round of infrastructure purchases and how they might shift their strategies over time. And you do see that that's being reflected in the performance of infrastructure vendors in the market today. So for example, when it comes to Dell Technologies, their storage business has growth in the last year has been slightly trailing some of the other storage vendors in the market. And Jeff Clark kind of finally commented on that in the last earnings cycle, saying that while the IP storage growth for the companies is doing well, it's really the storage challenge they're seeing is driven by HCI customers who are rethinking their private cloud options, or maybe slowing down on making purchases that they would have in the past while they evaluate where they're going to go next. If they're going to stick with HCI, maybe choose a different hypervisor vendor, or if they're going to take a new path entirely. So the evidence is there that there's action being taken by customers, or maybe in some cases a bit of inaction today as they line up their next plans. Ben, I'll hand it over to you for kind of the second trend that's driving this discussion.
Sure. So first, I think that's a really great data point and kind of quote from Jeff Clark. We do hear him talking a lot about their IP storage mix changing and how that's affecting their profitability. But moving on to this slide, so will Angela describe some of the trends in hyperconverged infrastructure impacting disaggregated infrastructure, or maybe we'll make the connection a little bit later here. I want to take a moment and detail some of the broader workload-related trends that we're seeing in the market. So on the right side of the slide, you'll see a graphic, and that's, again, from the infrastructure customer research that Angela cited earlier, which looks at survey survey responses from 250 IT decision makers across a variety of industry verticals. And here we can see AI and machine learning now represent the most common workload type that is run in data centers and co-location environments. And what's unique about these accelerating AI and machine learning workloads compared to traditional workloads is their increasing disparate needs for both compute and storage, which ties into perhaps the single or maybe the second greatest driver of disaggregated infrastructure adoption after the trends that Angela discussed with VMware and HCI. With the proliferation of these workloads, organizations are increasingly prioritizing the need to scale compute and storage resources separately. And this is something that can relatively easily be done in public cloud environments, something that is typically more difficult and kind of complex in an on-premise or co-location environment. Additionally, we see organizations outside of China, particularly, continuing to prioritize investments in best-of-breed infrastructure stacks, many of which are multi-vendor. For example, an organization might opt to purchase its compute infrastructure from Dell, its storage infrastructure from Pure Storage, and its networking equipment from Cisco, rather than relying on a single vendor for all components of the infrastructure stack, which is a little bit of a change from what we saw, again, kind of circling back on the default kind of standard of hyperconverged. Another trend we see is organizations prioritizing data privacy. And I think this bodes really well for infrastructure OEMs and the growth of the private cloud market. Certain workloads among organizations in the public sector and financial services in particular also have data residency and data government requirements, or data governance requirements, I should say, which is yet another private cloud tailwind. Sovereign AI is also gaining momentum, especially in EMEA, where the regulatory environment is more developed. And over time, TBR believes that we'll see these types of data governance regulations take deeper hold in other geographies as well. Probably first in the Americas, and then maybe in some more in the APAC nations. In aggregate, these are the key trends that we're following in the market, all with the implication on growing, kind of expanding the private cloud market and adopting disaggregated infrastructure architectures. So we've talked about disaggregated infrastructure already, but now I think is as good a time of any is to kind of go into detail about how TBR defines that term. The TBR sees disaggregated infrastructure as a data center architecture where compute, storage, and networking resources are decoupled or disaggregated into independent pools with software layered on top to dynamically connect and provision these resource pools to support different applications. By nature, this allows for the independent scaling of all three components of the infrastructure stack, which enables more flexible scaling as well as improved resource allocation. As we've discussed, traditional workloads have evolved and AI and machine learning workloads have proliferated, which has given way to organizations placing increased emphasis on flexible scaling of private cloud data center resources. Additionally, modern applications require access to multiple siloed data sources in many cases, and disaggregated infrastructure architecture is the most efficient way to kind of orchestrate and execute these types of workloads. Additionally, touching on what Angela went over, those VMware licenses changes have driven many organizations to reevaluate their workloads from a cost optimization and future-proofing perspective, and this is contributing quite significantly to the momentum behind disaggregated infrastructure. So from there, kind of looking at
oh yeah.
sorry. So from there, kind of looking at what OEMs have been doing to support disaggregated infrastructure, we're seeing infrastructure OEMs across the industry remaining invested in the development of their respective IT operations management platforms. And a lot of that investment is going to integrating things like new agentic AI ops features and expanding the number of both first and third-party hardware supported by the platforms. Additionally, infrastructure OEMs are forming partnerships to take advantage of customers' shifting preferences. So for instance, one of those partnership developments that really stands out to me is from May, and it's between Pure Storage and Nutanix, with Nutanix being a real prominent player in the hyperconverged area, and one that's definitely going to probably see some growth with VMware being displaced a little bit due to those licenses changes. So through this partnership, Pure Storage's flash array systems will actually be able to act as external storage for Nutanix hyperconverged systems, which does blur the lines a little bit between hyperconverged and disaggregated infrastructure. And in a way, it's really a combination and a way to make hyperconverged more disaggregated.
Yeah, giving, it is funny when the lines get blurred there, but ultimately just giving customers more choice and a little bit more flexibility in terms of something that a product area they've been seeking more flexibility on scaling for a while. Some of the other ways I've been thinking about the portfolio announcements, changes, adaptations, in my mind, I kind of break them into two groups within disaggregated infrastructure and the trends I've seen from vendors. So first of which being pretty private cloud centric, and then second of which being generally more AI centric. So with the portfolio changes around disaggregated infrastructure specific to private cloud, I think what we see from infrastructure vendors today are trying to address two goals. So one of which being reducing management costs. So that's obviously a benefit of hyper-converged infrastructure. Going towards disaggregated, I think two of the big ways that this happens is one, through reducing deployment time, automation, tools, software, both in kind of overarching private cloud platforms as well as built into the infrastructure themselves, to drastically reduce how long it's taking to deploy pieces of the infrastructure stack. We also see vendors releasing blueprints or kind of like reference architectures within these private cloud models in order to help customers more quickly get to a solution that's going to address their particular use case. So reducing the deployment time significantly through these platforms is certainly one major goal. And then it's about simplifying management over the long term in terms of being able to monitor infrastructure, remediate issues with infrastructure, better integration of vendors' support within the platform, and having better integrations with other peers in the ecosystem are definitely all major areas where we see in the private cloud, disaggregated infrastructure space, vendors focusing a lot. So to us, or at least to myself, the portfolio offerings and innovations around the infrastructure are within the typical private cloud workloads. They're not so much on the infrastructure themselves as they are around the IT ops and the private cloud platforms, and in some cases, new hypervisor options as well that are being announced and released to help reduce some of the management burden as customers evaluate other non-HCI options. And I think we're going to see a lot more in this category coming up as we move into 2026. Looking at some of the tech previews we've been privy to coming up in the next year, I think that we'll see even more solutions that are specifically pointed at helping customers who are in an in-between state right now, where maybe they are still using VMware and they have workloads that are going to be needed to be supported over the next couple years, and that's going to require additional infrastructure purchasing and investment, but maybe VMware's not in their roadmap over the next 5 years. So I think we're going to see more solutions that again help with flexibility and transitioning, while also helping customers protect the investments that they're making. Because right now, the customer feedback that we hear by and large is that customers don't want to be taken advantage of in this process of migrating to potentially new tech stacks or new technologies. So they're very keen on ensuring that they're reducing, if they're reducing their virtualization costs, that they're not then having costs snuck up on them in other areas. So that's the private cloud portfolio space. On more specific to AI, we see this as kind of a subset where it's really led by the storage vendors in terms of their focus on disaggregated storage and having high-performance storage offerings that are being married with data management platforms that can integrate with some of the leading compute and accelerator partners in the AI space to give significantly more scalability, but also be optimized to absolutely maximize the storage performance. So here it's really more about making sure that there are no bottlenecks in terms of the AI compute that these enterprise customers are investing in. Wanting to make sure that that cost per token is as minimized as it possibly can be, and storage can't be a bottleneck for that. So that, I think, is going to be an entirely separate category of disaggregated infrastructure. It's a bit of a different customer set, but is another area where we see significant opportunity for vendors to provide solutions in this area.
I'm really almost adjacent to that point that you're making there with what storage vendors are doing, specifically around AI. I think we're also seeing a trend that we've seen kind of in the compute space as well, where that one big AI company is really coming in, laying down blueprints for companies to build off of and create pre-validated solutions that also tie in with its validated compute stack. So I think there's that one big company in there that's tying things together and maybe stealing some of the margin, and then definitely I think personally some of the uniqueness that's offered by the different vendors just by standardizing some of the architectures that these solutions are built on.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's chat a little bit about some of the customer benefits we're seeing, and then the benefits for vendors in this space as well. So I'll share a couple of thoughts on customer benefits that I'm seeing. For me, it really comes down to more choice and more flexibility. I love that you mentioned best of breed earlier, because I think that there's a lot of opportunity here for customers to choose more best of breed solutions. And as you mentioned, there's partnerships emerging around that area. I think that where else we see the benefit is in time savings and hopefully cost savings on some of those automation platforms that can reduce some of the work for the customer. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say the same. I mean, if I think about maybe the two biggest reasons why HCI has really been a strong option for enterprises and SMBs in the past for their on-premise infrastructure solution is really the ease of deployment and the ease of manageability. And I think as Angela's discussed, a lot of that has kind of been incorporated or rolled into these these management platforms, whether it's a store-specific management platform or something broader like an IT ops management platform, I think a lot of those benefits and manageability are being addressed in a way now that you can have the same level of manageability that you might have had with the HCI solution, with the disaggregated solution. And then just from the deployment standpoint, it's a big focus for infrastructure OEMs to drive services revenue. And one of the ways they're doing that is by offering a lot of different kind of tiered storage or tiered deployment services offerings. So I think that kind of eats away at the value proposition of the ease of deployment there. And then with respect to whether infrastructure OEMs benefit from disaggregated infrastructure, I kind of see this two ways. I think in general, like an aggregated infrastructure architecture, it is one, less flexible, but also because it's so tightly integrated throughout the entire stack, it does drive vendor lock-in, which is not something that a customer is going to like, but is something that infrastructure OEMs benefit from. So in that respect, I think that they lose a little bit of kind of the stickiness or lock-in that they have with customers throughout the entire infrastructure stack. However, I do think that with these IT ops management platforms, by getting a customer into your platform, for instance, say you have a customer in GreenLake, even if they're using some third-party hardware, GreenLake's going to provide some visibility into the efficiency of that third-party hardware, and in some cases can be a way to kind of drive sales of maybe an HPE ProLiant server versus an older legacy server, where it's easy for HP to make a distinction and talk about kind of cost of ownership savings you would have from deploying their newer solution. And again, that's just one example with GreenLake kind of at the top of my head, but all the infrastructure OEMs we follow have their own kind of hybrid cloud, IT ops, and prep cloud management platforms. So I think that does kind of give a way to drive stickiness, where stickiness has maybe been lost with a move toward disaggregated infrastructure.
Absolutely. Okay, with a few minutes left here, let's talk about more forward-looking trends and expectations. I'll toss out a few and see what you think, Ben. So going back to my two camps of opportunity in disaggregated infrastructure, which were private cloud and then separately AI via disaggregated storage. I think that for AI and storage, there's a very real opportunity there. It's perhaps confined to a smaller customer set today. I think it will certainly grow substantially over time, but there's a lot of long-term value in capturing these AI workloads and growing data sets that are going to require high-performance storage. And I think that's super valuable today in terms of how the data management platforms are marrying with these high-performance storage systems. But also looking at the private cloud, so that's really kind of the broader opportunity here, because we're thinking about kind of an innumerable amount of workloads that are on premises today. So do we think that disaggregated infrastructure is going to cause some kind of major spike in infrastructure demand? For me, I would say probably not. I think that this is going to be something that's evaluated in the purchasing cycle. I don't think it will accelerate purchasing cycles of IT infrastructure in any particular way, but I think that it's just reflective of a number of new strategies that could potentially be employed, and that it's going to have, there's going to be a more in-depth conversation over, it has been happening in the past year or two, but continuing moving forward. So I think that it's going to kind of grow as as customers refresh their infrastructure over kind of their regular cadences. And I think that the value proposition that could potentially be brought forward here may help to intend against public cloud, right? Because vendors have to keep in mind that if customers are moving off of VMware, on-prem isn't the only potential solution there. It could be migrating to a public cloud solution, and CSPs are acutely aware of that as well and doing their best to make that happen. So what do you think, Ben?
I think maybe bridging from that idea about some of these VMware workloads and customers reevaluating. I mean, some classic legacy virtualized workloads need to stay on VMware and are going to be virtualized for the foreseeable future. But one trend that we see in talking with our colleagues adjacent to us in the cloud practice is that the rise of that real cloud native kind of containerized application does cannibalize a little bit of the virtualization market. From that respect, I see maybe the public cloud benefiting a little bit from these reevaluations of virtualized workloads. But I'd agree with you in kind of your point where disaggregated infrastructure, it is, I don't know, to me, it's somewhat of a buzzword. Disaggregated infrastructure architecture isn't really new. So I think what we'll see with growth is really these disaggregated infrastructure solutions growing more in line with just the more broad private cloud growth that we'll see in the market. And I think two of the really big factors there, or maybe even one more overall, would be enterprise AI, right? So we hear about that all the time, whether it's listening into NVIDIA's earnings or any of the infrastructure OEMs, that enterprise AI, this wave is coming, which will draw more of these AI workloads on premises, and whether that's in the core data center or at the far edge, we'll see more inferencing. So I think with enterprise AI, maybe that's the biggest, I won't say question mark, but determinant of private cloud growth. And then I think that more broad private cloud growth is what we'll see being the driver of adoption of disaggregated infrastructure architectures.
Awesome. So I know we're at our time here, Ben, but I'll toss you the top question I see in the Q&A, and we can wrap up on that. So do you think any of the infrastructure vendors could potentially benefit more than others from VMware's licensing changes?
That is an excellent question, and I hate that I already used HP as an example here earlier in the presentation, but to me, it would be HPE. We saw them release VM Essentials shortly after VMware's acquisition being acquired by Broadcom. And I think what is unique about VM Essentials to me is not only its ability to kind of look across multiple hypervisors, but it's also HPE bringing its own KVM-based hypervisor to market. So I think with that, HPE is really positioned well to kind of grab a little bit of the share of customers that are disgruntled with the VMware licensing changes. But while that solution's new, I know HPE's seen a ton of interest in the solution. I think we'll need a little bit more time to see who is really the winner of that workload share.
Yeah, I know they mentioned their last earnings. They have at least 100 or so customers that have adopted VM Essentials, which is great. I think that's a unique approach. And all I'll say on top of that is, keep your eyes out for the next couple of months, because I wouldn't be surprised if we see some other unique solutions from other OEMs that are going to address some of these pain points too.